glassmaker or gaffer for this show will be Claire Coffey. Let's give her a big warm welcome to the stage as she gets going. Thank you all for that. My name's Alex and I'm here for you all. I'll be talking you through this process, and if you have any questions or curiosities along the way, please feel free to get my attention. I would love to answer those for you. So quick show of hands, how many of us have seen glass making before? All right, about 50% of us, awesome. Now, if you haven't seen it before, don't worry, I'm gonna talk you through each step of the process. So Claire began by collecting some clear molten glass out of our melting furnace over on the other side of the studio. That furnace is kept at 2,120 degrees Fahrenheit, and at that temperature, our glass will move and flow quite a bit like warm honey. It'll also radiate its own light, which is why it looks orange right now. Now, Claire just trapped a breath of air inside of the pipe. That air wants to escape, and the only path it has to take is into that soft, molten glass. So that gives us our starter bubble here. Now, Claire told me that she's going to do something a little extra special for this bubble. She's going to put it into a mold to give it some texture on the surface before she goes back in for another layer. Now, the amount of material that Claire has is enough to make something fairly small, like a stemless wine glass or a holiday ornament. But in order to make the piece she has in mind, she's going to need another layer of glass. Now, every time we take another layer of glass out of the furnace, that's also an opportunity to add color glass or texture. So she's going to go into a mold that we call a pineapple mold. The interior of the pineapple mold has a series of teeth inside of it, very much like the skin of a pineapple. That's why we call it a pineapple mold. When Claire plunges the bubble into that mold, it'll take on a texture very similar to that of a golf ball. And then when she goes and collects glass over the top of it, we're going to get a result of bubbles, something like this. So there she blew the bubble into the mold. You have kind of two options for how to get out of the mold. There's all those undercuts so you can get stuck in there if you're not fast enough. And those two options are to either inhale slightly, which sounds really scary, but no hot air will come back out of the pipe. Or you can rely on the weight of that mold to just pull the glass out. It'll stretch it out and kind of allow you to come out that way. So I think Claire inhaled a little bit on that one. But now we have this beautiful texture. You can see it on the cameras. And when she goes back in to collect another layer, the glass in the furnace just is not liquidy enough to fill in the texture. So all of those little dimples are going to translate into little bubbles. Now, if she wanted to add color to this piece, she would have done that fresh out of the furnace. The easiest way to add color to our glass is to roll it through little chips of chopped up colored glass called frit. When we do this, the heat transfers, causing these particles to stick to the surface, creating a thin jacket of color over our clear base. But the bubble texture will be kind of just a nice thing on its own without adding any color to the piece. So we're going to stick it clear for this. Claire's cooling this glass down because she wants it to be rigid enough that it can support the heat and weight of another layer of glass over the top of it. So aggressively cooling it down with the air hose there, and now it's plenty cool enough you can even hear how cold it sounds. So here she'll plunge that bubble below the molten surface inside of our furnace, rotating smoothly in one direction will allow her to spool on that extra layer of glass over the top. Now when she comes out, she has about triple the amount of glass she started off with. If she allowed this layer to drop in temperature and went back in for another, she would again have around triple or double the amount of material. So pretty quickly you can get a lot of glass built up on the ends of these pipes. Here, Claire uses a cherry wood scoop tool called a block to cool, center, and shape that fresh layer of glass, really ensuring that that core bubble is wrapped in a uniform layer of thickness. Now, it might seem surprising and silly to use wooden tools to shape molten glass, but these tools are kept saturated with water. As they make contact with the glass, the water will turn to steam, creating a protective buffer between both materials. This tool functions on the same premise, but it's a flexible version of those pads. Do we have anyone out here that knows what that pad is made out of? You can shout it out if you know. It's newspaper.
Newspaper?
Pretty silly, right? I even heard it gasp. Now, we're not sure who first decided to shape molten glass with newspaper. It seems like quite the leap of faith. But we're awfully glad that they chose to try it because it's the closest that we could get to shaping the glass with our bare hands. Now, the key to those newspaper pads is that you want more than one sheet of newspaper going into it, of course. You take a few sections and fold them up into thirds and into thirds again, and that gives you a nice pad of material to work with. So check this out. Claire got a nice reheat on that glass, stuck it down into a mold. The glass takes on the texture from the mold, giving us these beautiful ridges. Now, these are not finishing molds. Claire's not going to be making a citrus reamer for us here today. But if she works pretty quickly, she'll be able to preserve the texture that she just got, and we'll have a new optical effect on the surface of our glass. So we call these molds optic molds because they change the optical quality of the glass, kind of causing light to refract a little bit differently. Now, Claire's also attached a hose to the mouthpiece of the pipe. Traditionally, glass blowers would simply put that mouthpiece in their mouth, blow to inflate the vessel. But over the last 2 years, we weren't able to put our mouths on the ends of pipes because we were all wearing masks. So this was our system, our solution to taking our mouths out of the glass blowing equation, enabling us to do these demonstrations with our masks on. But we've also found that it's just a pretty useful tool. We've already seen Claire both tool the glass and shape it at the same time without needing to ask me to crouch on the other side of the workbench and blow into that pipe for her. So we've kept the tool around, and a lot of us really like to use it for things. Here, Claire's picked up a metal tool in her right hand. This tool is called the jacks, and she used those jacks to begin a constriction that separates the piece that she's working on from the pipe that it's attached to. That constriction is going to be a structural weakness in the glass, where she can selectively cool it down in order to break the vessel free, revealing the opening a little bit later on in the process. But it's key to get that constriction started early on. The thinner the glass gets, the more it's going to be cooling down rapidly when you're out of the heat source. So if you forget to make that constriction, your life is going to be really difficult when the time comes to break the glass. Now, the reheating furnace, there's no glass inside of there beyond the glass on Claire's pipe. She'll utilize that furnace throughout the entire process in order to keep the material soft and malleable. I got you, Claire. Now, this is kind of one of the pitfalls of that system. Sometimes that little cap pops off the back end of your pipe and you're kind of left helpless there for a moment. But here she's got quite a bit more volume going into that glass, creating that constriction, making sure that it's small enough that when the time comes to break, it should break nice and evenly right around it. So you can really see just how useful that inflation system is. She's doing so much work on her own without having to tilt the pipe out and blow into it, potentially losing some of the control over the material. Now, a little cold air up against that constriction will prevent it from wiggling and wobbling around as Claire prepares to add the next piece onto this, which is going to be a solid foot right onto the base of our vessel. But before we do that, we want to take a brief overall heat on the vessel and maybe even change it using gravity. So we can use gravity in a few different ways. We can tilt the pipe down towards the ground. That will cause the glass to stretch and elongate. Or we can even hold the pipe up towards the sky. When we do that, the bubble will collapse back on itself, creating a squatter, wider form. Now, Claire knows what it is she's making. She knew before she even began collecting glass. That's very important. If you don't know what it is you're going to be making, you're going to be fumbling around for tools, trying to figure out what it is you're doing. And I like to compare glass making to playing chess. If you don't have a strategy in mind, your opponent, which in this case is the glass and gravity, is going to win. You're going to end up with something that's either just not a very nice piece of glass or even glass drizzled all over the floor. But here we see that use of gravity, the tip of the bubble falling back onto itself, creating a beautiful squat form. Now, when we do that, we also might want to inflate it again, kind of making sure that the concavity of the bottom of the vessel is just right. Here she uses a graphite pad to cool sections of the glass so it doesn't overinflate in those areas. She gave me a head nod that makes me suspect that she's ready for a solid foot. So I'm going to collect some glass out of the furnace here. You might have noticed that Claire's hands are pretty occupied running the pipe, running the tools. She doesn't have any extra hands to get glass with. For that reason, you'll see glassblowers typically working in pairs like the two of us up here, or even in groups of 3 or more. The more complicated a piece is, the more you want more hands around. So there she added that glass in a method called casting on and casting off, winding the glass, spooling it right onto the tip of the vessel, and then stretching it into a thin strand so that the radiant heat from that blob of glass breaks it free from the pipe that I had. Now here we'll work together with 2 tools in tandem, essentially creating a mold on the fly. She's shaping the top section, the profile of that foot, while I'm making sure that it maintains a nice flat plane on the bottom. This will ensure that it can rest nicely on a tabletop when everything's said and done. But now that we have the foot on that vessel, we're finished with everything that we want to accomplish while we're connected to the blowpipe. And we need a way to gain access to the opening of the vessel. So I'm going to prepare a temporary handle for Claire. This is called a punty, and it consists of a little bit of glass on the end of a solid stainless steel rod. And I'm going to cool this glass down quite a bit before I bring it over. If I bring it over as hot as I did that foot, it would stick and bond permanently to the bottom of our vessel. So we want to build intentional weakness into this new connection, kind of like how we built intentional weakness into the neckline of the piece, that constriction. So cooling the glass down will make a weaker bond. It'll still be plenty hot to stick. But this is often the stage of this process where beginners go terribly wrong. And I'll talk about that here in a moment. Claire takes the punty, sticks it right to the center of the bottom of the foot. Nice shot. We turn these 2 pipes back and forth. If anything's off center, we have a moment here where we can kind of push it onto center. I might need a little air on my punty. There we go, that feels better. Now sometimes those punties feel really wiggly and wobbly, so a little air freezes them in place. A cold tool and a sharp tap breaks it free. Let's give Claire a big round of applause for that smooth transition. Now, as I was saying, at the beginning of your glassmaking career, that's the moment where everything goes horribly wrong. If the connection to that new pipe is made too cold, when you go to break it free from the original pipe, it'll release simultaneously from both. In that instance, whatever you've been working on will crash down to this very conveniently located bucket right beside the workbench. Even more heartbreaking, however, is the other end of that spectrum. If that connection is made too hot, you'll probably get through the entire forming process, but it will have bonded permanently to the bottom of your piece. When you go to remove that rod at the end, it'll rip the bottom of your piece right off with it. So it's a pretty tricky maneuver to get down. A lot of things with glass blowing is kind of like playing Goldilocks. Too hot, too cold, just right. So you have to kind of go through a lot of failure in the beginning of your glassmaking career before you can become a good glassmaker. Now, we say it takes between 3 to 6 years to get over that learning curve, and the reason for it is there's a lot of muscle memory going into working with this material. Nobody really comes in on their first day prepared to rotate a stick with a liquid on the end of it, but also there's a lot of different things to learn about the glass itself. If it gets too cold, it can experience thermal shock, cracking and breaking spontaneously at any point in the process. If it gets too hot, especially at a stage like this where you can't inflate the glass further, it has the potential to crumple right up on itself and become unusable. So it's a pretty tricky material to work with. Right now, Claire is focusing the heat right out at the opening of the vessel, and believe it or not, everything along the front of our stage started off with just as narrow of an opening. So there's still a wide variety of options for how she might choose to finish this form. But we know that she's not going to be making a vase because we've got an awfully short shape for that. So it's likely to be more of like a bowl or a platter. We'll have to see where she goes with it. But this is also a very good opportunity. Do we have any questions out there so far? Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. How do we get the camera in the furnace? Now, they haven't developed a GoPro Inferno yet, so the camera's not actually in the furnace. It's seated right behind it. But what's really special about that view is a little window that the camera's looking through. That window is made of a different type of glass. There are thousands of different recipes of glass. And that particular one is a type of glass called fused silica. It melts at a temperature closer to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, making it perfectly comfortable in our 2,000 degree oven. Now, fused silica was invented by Franklin Hyde in 1934, and initially they didn't have a purpose for this high fire glass. It was kind of just a neat thing. Until a little company called NASA came along and said, we'd really like to go in and out of the atmosphere and have a windshield that can protect us in the meantime. So it's been utilized for all of those space missions. Check this out. Claire's gonna cut through glass here. Using a pair of shears, she trims all the way around the vessel. Now, doing this is going to reveal the stronger ribs from the mold that she went into. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. Now, fused silica is also very optically pure, which makes it ideal for the core for fiber optic cable. So all of us make use of fused silica every day, whether we're aware of it or not, to send messages, send emails, and even to binge our favorite glass-blowing Netflix shows. Now, what I mean by how she cut into the glass to reveal the stronger ribbing, when we put that constriction in the bubble to be able to break it away from the pipe, it kind of smushes out the texture from the mold. So by cutting into it, she cuts into the deeper part of the pattern. This should turn into a nice scalloped edge at the very end of the process. Now I see we have another question here. Can you talk real loud for me?
What is glass made of?
What is glass made of? What an excellent question. There are 3 main ingredients. Does anybody know the main ingredient for glass? Sand, yes. Now, our glass is made with a very special type of sand called silica sand. It gets mined out of the Earth's crust. To lower the melting temperature of that silica sand, because it melts around 4,000 degrees. So to lower the melting temperature, we add soda ash. But if you have just silica sand and soda ash, you'll make a glass that's water soluble. So we also add limestone to the ingredients. That acts as a stabilizer, preventing it from turning into just kind of a sludge of sand and salt over time from humidity in the atmosphere. So the limestone makes it all archival. If you want to make different colors, you add different metal oxides to those ingredients. Cobalt will give you blue, manganese will give you purple, and gold will give you the pink. I'll take your question in just a moment. I want to draw our attention to Claire here. She's opened up the walls of this vessel, and I think that she's probably going to drastically change the shape of this in the next few moments here. So you'll want to keep your eyes on the screens and then on Claire. She's going to get that glass so hot that it no longer can retain its structure. It'll be a liquid again. Now, if it's a liquid and you're just turning slow, it's going to crumple up on itself. So to prevent that from happening, she's going to start to turn faster and faster. When she does this, the rim of the vessel is going to whip away from center, creating a wide open form without the need of any additional tooling. So you'll want to watch carefully. When this happens, it'll happen fast. She'll turn really slow, and she's looking at the glass and also feeling the motion of the glass through that pipe. As it starts to wiggle and wobble around, that's when she'll begin to turn even faster. So there it starts to wiggle. Starts to turn a little bit faster. There we go. The rim of the vessel peels away from center. Now, if she just keeps turning, keeps the glass level, we'll end up with a platter. But she holds it down towards the ground. The glass wants to go back to where it was, but it can't. So instead we get a slight wrinkle to the edge of the piece. Now, if you'll notice, we do also have that scalloped edge I was talking about. So those thicker portions from the mold, they stay on a little bit longer. As she spins, they travel a little bit further, giving us that nice scalloped edge. What do you all think? Yeah. Now, as fast as that happened, the glass has already frozen in place. A few drops of water added right at the connection to the puntee will weaken it, making it ready to break. And the last step for this piece of glass is actually the longest. It'll be a very slow cooling process. So a light tap is all it takes. The vessel breaks free, and off to the oven it will go to very slowly cool down over about 8 hours. That's a process called annealing, and all types of glass have to go through it in order to relieve stress on the atomic level. All right, folks, let's give it up for Claire one more time. All right, we had a question right here.
Is silica sand rare?
Is silica sand rare? Not exactly. It makes up about 70% of the Earth's crust. So there's quite a lot of it in pockets all over the world. Do we have any other questions out there? All right. Well, if you think of questions, please come on down. I'd love to talk to you. And I see a lot of us are wanting to get out and explore all of the different things out there to explore. We're open until 7, so you still have plenty of time to see everything, folks. Thank you again for joining us, and have a fantastic rest of your evening.